Welcome, everyone, to the Antique Radio Club of Illinois' virtual forum. This is our 25th in a series of virtual forums, and I'm very pleased to be here today and welcoming all of you that have joined in, and members of ARCI and members of all the other radio clubs around the country. So thank you very much for tuning in today. I'll point out that we have two more virtual forums planned for 2023. The one in September is a TBD date at the moment, but we have November 18th slated as a firm date. We welcome your feedback. If you got any feedback about what we're doing, or if you have any ideas, please use that email address right there. And please consider doing a presentation or a show and tell. Our protocol is pretty simple. If you're not presenting something, please stay on mute. That helps with getting things completed. And you use the chat window if you want to send some information to the group that we can save and have as a text file. So a lot of the information you have can be put in a little archive that way. So we do record these and put these on YouTube at a later date. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Matt, who will talk just a little bit about the YouTube aspect of this.
Thanks, Tom. Everybody should be familiar with this. The main item here is that YouTube is very persnickety about copyrighted material. So when you're playing your radio, please keep it off a music station, put it on a talk station, so you're not playing copyrighted music. YouTube has a new feature called a handle, which basically just means it's a new link, and they all start the same, www.youtube.com/@, and then there's the name, and our name is Antique Radio Club of Illinois. Not so easy to type, but quite memorable. I did want to point out that each and every of our YouTube videos is indexed. So if you're looking at a YouTube video and you look right under the title, it says show more. You hit that box and then this larger window opens, which is the description. And those blue times are hot links to the particular item in the video. So if you want to skip me and jump right to a presentation, that's easy to do. And last but not least, we now have a full index of every YouTube presentation that we've done over the past 3 years. And the way you see this is when you're on the channel, you click to the About page. That will open up this screen. Down at the bottom here, it says Full Index of Presentations. Click that, and that will bring you to a spreadsheet. This is a snip from it. It's much longer than this, but it lists, the date, time, and what the presentation title is, who did it, sometimes a little more information about it. And there's a link that will take you straight to that portion of the presentation of that particular video. So it's searchable too. In today's show and tell, I'll actually demonstrate that. That's it for We're on YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And at this point, Matt puts up a little poll about the show and tells to see if you have one today. So now you should see the agenda for today. And we've got 3 presenters lined up. Should be a very entertaining and informative virtual forum. Our first presenter, Dr. Brian Belanger, has presented for the virtual forum twice before, and they were very interesting and entertaining presentations. And today, Brian will talk about the auto radio. His title is Music While You Drive, A History of the Auto Radio. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Brian, and I will add that Brian is the national television museum curator back in Baltimore or in that area. So, Brian, I kind of butchered that, but maybe you could introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm pleased to have been invited to talk to you this morning. I have to say, I'm very pleased that I joined ARCI. I've really enjoyed your Zoom meetings and I really enjoy your publications. So very happy that I'm a member. And this morning, I'm going to be talking about the history of the auto radio. And actually, let me mention that if you are interested in this topic, there's a marvelous book. The author is Don Mattison, Matteson. It's called The Auto Radio, A Romantic Genealogy. And it may be out of print, but I'm sure if you go to something like ABE Books or Amazon, you could probably find a used copy. It's really excellent. I'm sure it's probably the best book ever written on the topic. So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about auto radios. The first question is, what was the first auto radio? And that's sort of hard to pin down. Of course, as you all know, it was November 1920 when KDKA came on in Pittsburgh, and that was the first real start of entertainment broadcasting on a real scale. Even prior to that, there were a few ham operators that tried to put receivers or transmitters in their cars. There's a picture here of Albert Greeby's ham station, and if you take a look at the antenna, he's got a pole on the front bumper and a pole on the back, and a kind of a flat top antenna between the front and back of his car. But in those days, a few people who try to install radio equipment in their cars wouldn't really imagine using it while they were driving. They would sort of park someplace on a mountaintop and use it there. So prior to World War I don't think anybody was thinking about having mobile equipment that you'd work on when you were driving. So there are, of course, some obvious problems with car radios. Ignition noise, spark plugs make a lot of RF noise, and not so much today. They make tires differently, but in the early days, tires generated a lot of static electricity, and so there was tire noise to contend with. If you go back to the 1920s, the typical battery set from the 1920s was designed to use a big outdoor long wire antenna, 125-foot antenna, as high as you could get it with a good ground. And so when you're riding in a car, you're not going to have a 125-foot long wire or a ground. So that's a problem. In the 1920s, you had horn speakers, and they weren't very loud. So if you're in a moving car, you need a lot of volume. And of course, the early battery sets typically used a 6-volt battery for the filament, the 90-volt battery for the plate, and a few volts for the grid bias. And then you had the problem of vibration and shock. And of course, highways in the 20s were much worse than they are today. Lots of big bumps and rocks in the road. So vibration and shock was a problem. And the suspension systems weren't as good as they are today. Yeah, the other thing is, let's say you installed a $3 battery set. You wouldn't be driving down a road and trying to tune in a $3 battery set. That would be difficult. And of course, the early radios were very expensive, so that was another deterrent. So very, very few people had auto radios in the early days, and they generally used them only when you were parked with the engine turned off. And of course, that meant the batteries would the battery would wear down pretty quickly. So here's a couple of early pictures. The one in the upper left there it looks like he's maybe a teenage kid. It's called the first radio car, and it looks like he's got a typical early 20s radio with a horn speaker there. And the fact that he's got a microphone in his hands suggests that he had a ham station, and that would have been pretty unusual in the day. Interesting enough, in 1921, the Detroit Police Department installed receivers in some of their cars, and the call letters of the station was KOP, very appropriate. The picture in the lower right shows another flat top antenna, and I'm sure the wire wasn't that curvy. I think somebody must have sort of drawn in with a pencil to show the wires. So one of the things you could do in the 20s was you could buy yourself a portable radio, like, for example, the RCA Radiola 24. And that was designed for home use, but there was nothing to prevent you from putting in the back seat of your automobile and driving down the road, listening to your portable radio. But of course, a lot of these early radios were designed to use with headphones. They didn't have loudspeakers that would have enough volume to fill up a car. Okay, well, we're not sure who came up with the first auto radio, but Madison mentions in Southern California, there's a guy named Earl Anthony who was early into radio broadcasting, and supposedly about 1922, he came up with a radio called a motor radio. And then in 1926, another name mentioned is William Heine, who designed a radio of his own. But in all my years of radio collecting, I have never seen a motor radio or I have never seen a Heine phone. So there must have been just a handful of those made, and I don't know if anybody has ever seen a picture of one. It was around 1930 when car radios started to actually be taken seriously. And you've probably all heard the story of Paul Galvin, Elmer Waverling, and Bill Lear, three friends who got together who were radio buffs and developed a car radio they called a Motorola. That was about 1929. Now, Motorola was the company name later on. When it first started, it was Galvin Manufacturing. And so if you look up car radios and rider's manuals, you have to look under Galvin rather than under Motorola in the early days. According to Don Madison, the Dodge 1929 Senior 6 had a factory-installed car radio, but that was very, very rare in those days to have a factory-installed radio. So it was really around 1930 when a number of companies began to offer radios, but it was generally for aftermarket installation. So here's an early picture. This is a transitone radio, and shortly after this, Philco purchased transitone, and so then you begin to see Philco radios with a transitone label on them. But notice the price here, $150 without even the tubes being included. Now, that was a lot of money in those days. And so it was very rare that anybody would be willing to spend that kind of money to get a car radio. It took a while for the prices to begin to come down. This is a typical installation back in that era. You'd have the big steel box with a car radio would usually be bolted onto the firewall on the passenger side, and you'd have a rather large speaker. And then the tuning dial was usually clamped onto the steering column, and you'd have a mechanical linkage like an old speedometer cable that would link the tuning control to the main body of the radio. And of course, you had to have batteries, so you'd have an A battery, a B battery, and sometimes a C battery to operate the radios. And in those days, most of the cars had canvas tops, so they would often put a copper mesh underneath the canvas top to serve as the antenna. All right, so in 1930, things begin to happen. Crosley introduced its car radio called the Romeo. That was only $75, quite a bit less than that transitone that we just saw. It says, take your favorite radio entertainment with you wherever and whenever you drive with a Romeo. So Crosley was an early car radio producer. Atwater, Kent, Philco, and ARCI also began selling auto radios about that same time. Here's a picture from 1932 on the left of an Autolite radio, and that shows a good example of one of those clamp-on tuning and volume controls that would clamp onto the steering column. The one on the right is a company I'd never heard of, Charles Hoodwin, and they were offering a car radio for $20. Although if you read the fine print, you'll notice that doesn't include tubes or batteries or speaker. So if you wanted all that other stuff, then it came down to be about $40 for the whole complete thing. But of course, you had to be willing to put a lot of effort in installing the radio. And I'm old enough that I occasionally worked on car radios back in the 1950s. And I can remember when you had the full front seat, lying upside down with my knees hooked over the top of the seat and with my head underneath the dashboard, reaching up, trying to undo all the screws. And it was really a hell of a job to get a radio in and out of a car in those days. Well, of course, one of the problems is the early radios all required batteries. And somebody wanted to find a better approach. A few companies tried using dynamotors to generate the high voltage DC, but in the early 30s, Mallory and a few other companies started coming out with vibrators to use that for the power supply to get the high voltage. Mallory was probably the leader in the vibrators, but there were other companies that made them also. And then, of course, by the time you got to the 1950s, things got much better because they developed 12-volt automobile ignition systems. So once cars started having 12-volt batteries, then some of the tube manufacturers came up with vacuum tubes that could operate with a plate voltage of 12 volts. So that made it much easier to design a radio. And then, of course, by the 1960s, transistor radios were beginning to take over, and they didn't require any high voltage. So here's a few more ads we can look at. 1935 was a year when car radios began to get a little bit more popular. And of course, you remember the early 30s, that was the depths of the Depression. So people didn't have much money, and sales of any kind of consumer product were way down. But by the middle to late 30s, things were getting to a little bit better. So here we see an Arvin radio on the left, and notice in this case, the loudspeaker is mounted up on the top between the two sun visors there. More often than not, the speakers were not underneath the dashboard. And then Emerson, of course, was in the business too. And here's a picture of Emerson's auto radio. That was $39.95. Some more from the later 30s. On the left is a Motorola, Galvin Manufacturing Corporation. And notice it has push buttons, and it's also quite a bit smaller and more compact than the early ones. And similarly, the Crosley on the right, also $24.95. That seemed to be a kind of a standard price. And so smaller radios with push buttons were what you were beginning to see from the late 1930s. And then we mentioned earlier the problem of antennas. They started by using a wire screen. Some of them early would put little insulators and run a wire underneath the running board, but of course that tended to get covered up with mud and dirt, and that would cause leakage. Or you might, if you went over a bump in the road, you might knock off your antenna. By the 1940s, the telescoping antenna on the fender was becoming popular, or sometimes they would be up above the windshield, and you could raise or lower the telescoping antenna. And then in the 1950s, some of the cars actually had a motorized antenna. My uncle had a 1954 Lincoln, and he was so proud of showing off he could push a button on the dashboard and the little antenna would go up and down. So when you went to a car wash, you'd remember to push the button and lower the antenna so it wouldn't be damaged. And then, of course, as time went on, they started molding the wires right into the window glass, and that became fairly common way of providing the antenna. Now, this is an interesting story. You may have seen this. This is a Philco radio that's built into an end table. It's actually a car radio. And what happened was, you know, the new automobiles come out in the late fall, and the new radios for the coming year come out in late fall. So in the fall of 1941, Philco was manufacturing lots of radios to go into the 1942 cars. And then, of course, as soon as Pearl Harbor hit, all of the automobile companies switched over to making tanks and Jeeps. And so Philco had a warehouse full of these 1942 car radios that they couldn't sell to the auto manufacturers anymore. So they adjusted the power supply for AC operation and stuck them in an end table. And I think somebody is saying that they've seen maybe one or two other brands of car radios that got stuck into end tables also. Well, then after World War II, you begin to have some fancy radios. This is General Motors Wunderbar radio in an Oldsmobile, and that was one of these station-seeking things where you push the button and it would automatically find the strong stations. I've never worked on one of these radios, but I understand it's kind of a Rube Goldberg system with a very complicated, you know, mechanical system that finds the stations for you. But of course, you know, in those days, it was still all AM radio. If you wanted FM, you could get a Gonset FM tuner like this one that you'd stick up underneath the dashboard, and then it would connect into the AM radio and play through your AM radio. If you wanted a record player in the 1950s, you could get this Chrysler's record player system that used a special type of 7-inch 16 and 2/3 RPM records. It was very expensive. RCA had a 45 RPM auto player that was probably a better deal. So as time went on, as I mentioned before, the 12-volt ignition systems led to the development of tubes that didn't require a high B+ voltage, which meant you didn't have to have vibrators in your car radio. And vibrators were a common source of trouble. If you had a car radio, you could count on having to replace the vibrator every few years. And then, of course, we went into transistors, which turned out to be a lot more reliable. And then eventually analog circuits and digital circuits. And with all of these changes, the reliability of car radios increased tremendously. Like back in the 1940s or 50s, if you had a car radio, you'd often have to bring it in for service, or a tube that's failed or a vibrator that failed. And car radios today tend to last for the life of the vehicle. You could also get a tape recorder. This is a Motorola 8-track. You could also get, at one time, a 4-track system. And then, of course, that changed over to cassette players. So up on top, here is a 2001 Chrysler Sebring, a very common situation, AM/FM radio and a slip-in cassette deck. And by a few years ago, you begin to see something more like this Dodge Caravan 2014. You had an AM/FM radio, a satellite radio for XM Sirius. You had a DVD player, so if you had kids in the back of your minivan, you could lower a little screen and the kids could watch a DVD. And you had a USB port. And the last few cars I've had a USB port, and that's something I really love, because rather than listen to contemporary programs, I have a flash drive with 750 Fibber, McGee, and Molly programs. So when I'm stuck on the Capitol Beltway and crabby from all the traffic, I'm listening to Fibber, McGee, and Molly and laughing, and it helps to pass the time. So today we've come a long ways. Of course, most cars today have flat panel displays, touch screens. Most have AM/FM radio. However, interesting enough, a lot of the electric cars are having a problem, because the electric cars apparently generate a lot of RF noise. And I understand that several of the auto manufacturers who make electric cars are not putting AM radios in them because of the noise problem. So some people have suggested that one of these days AM radio is going to be phased out. And of course, that's certainly a possibility. But it sounds like we may not be seeing as many AM radios in cars of the future. Very common to have a satellite radio in your car today, a CD player, DVD player. Most cars today have a GPS navigation system, which comes in really handy. Many of them have a Bluetooth, so you can have your cell phone connected to your car radio. And as I mentioned, a USB port is a really great thing. The OnStar system can call for help if you have an accident. So the point is, we've come a hell of a long ways. If you look at that picture again that we showed before with the flat top antenna, car radios today are certainly vastly superior to what we used to have in the old days. So it's been a long, gradual evolution to what we have today. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and I'd be willing to bet that many of you out there have had your own experiences with auto radios, and so I'd like to open it up and share your own experiences with auto radios.
Well, first, I'll thank you very much for that awesome presentation, Brian. That was really enlightening and thorough and well done. So thank you very much.
I have one picture to share with you if you're interested.
Yeah.
Okay. This is my 1973 Pinto station wagon. And at that time, there wasn't a public broadcasting station in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was one in Columbia, South Carolina. And on my hellacious commute into Charlotte every morning, I wanted to hear public radio. So I built this FM turnstile antenna and put a 10 dB RF amplifier going into a Heathkit FM converter, and then of course into the AM radio. And I used that rig for 3 years or more, and it worked great. And every once in a while have to roll down my window, and some guy would be asking, he says, what kind of a CB antenna is that? And of course, I didn't have time to explain it, but I had a lot of fun with that. So I'll turn it back to you guys.
Greg Van Beek sent me this before the meeting, and so I'll share that with you. Greg, you want to comment?
Sure, that dates back to, I think, 1930 or 31. It's a brochure for the Philco Transitone car radio. As you can see, at that time, it was $99.80. It was, prices were coming down a little bit, but still ways to go from $24.95 we saw in the late 30s. I think there's one more slide.
Yeah,
here.
one more. Let me, I might have to figure out where that went.
And about 3 or 4 years ago, a friend of mine picked up a 1934 Plymouth Coupe, and he had a factory Philco radio in it, and I worked on it for him. It was had a vibrator power supply already, and positive ground. And it was a Philco Transitone. And
Hey,
my
Greg.
dad,
Greg, are you seeing the other one now?
I'm seeing the other one. Yeah, there's a,
Okay, good.
not exactly sure what brand car that is there, but that's the other side of the pamphlet. And I was very familiar with the Highway Hi-Fi record player. My dad has a 1956 Plymouth Fury that has a working Highway Hi-Fi record player and the signal seeking radio. It's a Motorola radio that's in there. And it actually works. It's revolutions at 16 2/3 RPM, and the records are a little bit smaller in diameter than a 45 RPM, but there's 45 minutes of music on one side of the record. It rotates so slow you can count the revolutions just by watching the record.
How does that perform when you're driving along on a road?
Not too bad, surprisingly. They had a cushion system where the record player was mounted on kind of a softer rubber type material that when you went over a bump, it wouldn't jump the needle. Now, I haven't really tried it over railroad tracks or anything like that, but again, it was more based if you were parked, it would probably be the best place to listen to it. And then, as Brian was saying, they came out, I think in 59 or 60, they had a 45 RPM under the dashboard record player that would stack the records, and they could play a stack of traditional records you could buy, and those were a lot more successful. The 16 2/3 only lasted for 56 and 57, and they came out with the 45.
Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Greg.
Sure.
Anyone else have a
I'll make-
radio?
I'll make another quick comment. That is that many of the car radios were pretty good performing radios, and it was, of course, you're out in rural areas, so it was fairly common to have a stage of RF in a car radio, which meant they were better performers than a lot of the all-American 5s that people had in their homes.
I just got a quick one, and by the way, Brian, that makes it an all-American 6, I think, right? I started working at Motorola in 1979 to work on cellular telephone. And Motorola was still making OEM car radios in the US and in the UK and maybe other places. They got out of the aftermarket car radio quite a few years before that. They spun off the business in the early 80s. I forget the company they sold it to, but they gave them the rights to use the Motorola brand on the radios. Motorola's claim to fame was noise canceling. They came up with a patented noise canceling circuit to get rid of the ignition noise. That's what made car radio practical while you were driving. And that's in the early 30s. So Motorola kind of hung on to car radios too long, but because it was their first really successful business, they had trouble letting go of it. So just a quick little piece of history.
Thank you, Tom.
I'd make a comment. I had it was 2 years ago. I gave a presentation on that 1936 Auburn car radio. I think you guys have, and it was an adaptation of that Crosley Romeo that you were showing on the screen there. And it had a built-in vibrator that was part of the radio case. It wasn't an unpluggable vibrator, so it ran off the 6-volt battery in the car. And originally the car had that under chassis running board, whatever, antennas underneath the car, which Of course, we didn't end up reproducing. I put a regular antenna on there that kind of worked, but yeah, good presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I remember your presentation. That was very cool. Anyone else?
Brian, do you have a picture of that shop?
It would take me a while to find it, and I'm going to have to run because I'm on duty at our museum this afternoon. But what Matt is talking about is my wife and I moved into a senior citizen place just recently, and I didn't want to give up my workshop at home, but in our new senior citizen apartment, in our half bath where the HVAC stuff is in the washing machine, I built a little workbench so I can do the electronic restoration. Then down in the basement, they've got a fabulous wood shop with workbenches and drill press and table saw and belt sanders and every tool you could imagine. So I got a great place to work on cabinets, and I've got a good place to work on the chassis so I can still keep up my radio work.
That's great to hear.
Excellent.
Well, if you get a chance to send us a picture sometime, we'd love to see it. And our next presenter, Tom Kleinschmidt, is going to talk about a regenerative radio that he recently got working. And at this point, I'll just turn it right over to Tom.
Very good. Let me share the presentation. This was a happenstance find. So it's a Chelsea Model 110, and this particular one does not have a model number on it. I found it by looking through radiomuseum.org and some other places. And so we're going to talk about the company a bit and talk about the technology and the radio itself, and then I'll do a demo if it cooperates. So here we go. I think Chelsea went through multiple, I'll call it, iterations of their corporation, because you can see on this top group that they were in 3 different locations and some overlapping ones. So they also went by National Chelsea, and whether that was a separate company or whether they evolved into it, I don't know. There isn't a ton of information about Chelsea out in the world as we know it. They had some brand names they use on some of their sets. That doesn't include the one I have. Based on radiomuseum.org, they have radios dating from 1919 to 27, but 23, 24 seems to be their hot period, maybe 25. They sold through distributors like most companies did. They didn't sell direct. So a couple of them that are listed in Citizens Radio Call Book, which if you ever run across those early ones, there's just a wealth of information in those things between the articles and the advertising. So these are out of the ads. So they had a distributor in Chicago, one in Colorado, one in Massachusetts. I'm sure they had more. So if you want to find out more about Chelsea, this guy's website or YouTube channel is fabulous. In fact, I just watched a brand new one of his Chelsea's this morning. He seems to specialize in Chelsea radios. And like us, he doesn't have a huge number of subscribers, so you guys can help boost him. But if you go under Antique Radio Archaeology, you'll find him. And as I mentioned, radiomuseum.org has got a pretty good catalog of these things. So let's talk about regeneration. First off, Chelsea licensed the 1914 Armstrong patent. And the purpose of putting these up there is to show you that Armstrong patented 6 variations of the circuit. You know, they all functionally do much the same thing. But that's why when you see regenerative radios, you see quite a variety of configurations around that single tube. And that's, of course, the magic of these things is they run on one tube. So here's a hopefully easy to understand block diagram. This came out of a book called Radio Receivers, How to Make and Operate by Radio Digest. It's another wealth of information. It's a large format book, quite thin. The one I've got is in pretty bad shape, but the block diagram without the blue writing came out of there. And so basically what they're doing is they're taking the radio signal, running it through the tube, and then looping it back through the tube again and keep amplifying, keep amplifying, keep amplifying. And the tube also amplifies the audio. The tube is also the detector. So keep in mind, like a Swiss Army knife, this thing doesn't do anything really well. It just does it. So to give you some visuals, you know, you got a tuning capacitor on the particular one I've got, and then there's a tube in the middle. And then they have these really cool spiderweb coils, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. And then again, as was talked about, in Brian's conversation, these ran on headphones. They did have an optional amplifier that was in exactly the same case. In fact, if you go to the Radio Museum listing, it shows both pieces next to each other. And I spoke with the fellow that listed them, and he's quite into 20s radios and was real enthusiastic. So that's that piece. So here's what the spiderweb coils look like. And on the left, it's fully open, on the right, it's fully closed. And of course, it moves in between for tuning. And you can see there's not a whole lot of tonnage inside this radio. We've got a grid leak, a capacitor, a tube socket, a tube, variable capacitor, rheostat, and the coils. So, and keep in mind, this is what they call positive feedback. And so you can turn this thing into an oscillator real easy, and we'll demonstrate that later on. So let's talk about the pluses and minuses. As we talked about, it's simple and inexpensive. It has better sensitivity, obviously, than a crystal radio because it's amplified. Not tough on batteries. And back then, batteries were a much tougher commodity to keep going because they didn't last that long. It's small. It's about a 7-inch cube. And as I mentioned, one tube does it all. On the con side, just like any 20s radio, the selectivity is lousy because the issue wasn't the quantity of radio stations back then. It was the low power of the radio stations. So you needed sensitivity. You didn't need selectivity, meaning you didn't need to separate one station from another. And you may hear some background in the one when we run this one, so you can understand that. Nothing shielded because there was no such thing as a 50,000 watt station back then, and you didn't need to shield anything. We talked about the headphone. These things, if you ever watched Flash Gordon and watched Dr. Zarkov in the lab, that's how you operate this radio. You keep turning knobs until it works. And I think the more deluxe one of these may be more difficult to turn than this one. This one isn't awful because there's only 3 knobs to turn. And basically, once you get the station, it's just a matter of optimization. And again, it can go into oscillation and squeal and howl and be all kinds of annoying. And because it's an oscillator, it could mess with radios in the nearby proximity. So here's a Chelsea ad, again, out of the Citizens Radio Call Book. I will tell you, I didn't do an extensive research thing to find every ad in the world, but I had run across these. These 3 items with the blue arrows, however, are the exact parts that are used in my radio because Chelsea made parts. And they may have started out making components and went to radios, or they may have done both. I don't know. But all of those 3 parts in my radio actually say Chelsea on them. So that's just an interesting sidelight. Here's an ad that talks about their Model 122, but in the portfolio down here, they talk about the Model 110, which is this one, and it was $18. Which again, like we were talking about with that car radio that you could buy for $20, but wait, there's more. You got to buy batteries, you got to buy headphones, you got to put up an antenna. And by the way, the tube wasn't included either. And what tube they recommended, I don't know, but any one of these would work. Mine has a WX12 in it. The difference between the 11 and the 12 is there a 1.5 volt filament versus the 01, which is a 5 volt filament. So it's just a matter of what battery you hang on it. So here we go. So here's the radio itself. Antenna connections from the upper left. Main tuning dial and a tuning capacitor is here, and ground here. The volume is a filament control like it is on all those other 20s radios. This is the regeneration or tuning number 2 control, back to the block diagram. And the audio output is right here. And on the back side, you got an A and B battery connection. That's about as simple as you're going to get. There aren't 45 volts and all kinds of stuff. I'm running it at 120 volts DC. You can run it down to 60. I think you can run it up to 150 if I read the spec right, I might recall. And you'll find out why it's 120 in a second here. What I did is I took all the used 9-volt batteries I had laying around the house, mostly from smoke detectors and stuff, and I used them for various things. And I just hooked them up nose to tail. And there ended up being 16 of them. Well, if you look, 16 times 9 is not 120. So you know the condition of these batteries. When you get them nose to tail, they put them in series, that works great. But if you try and put them where you bridge across 90 degrees, they don't line up. So some of the dead ones, I took the the contact strip out, cut it in half, and put a jumper wire on it to make me 2 new snaps. And that's what this blue wires are that you see here. That's the back side of that. You can see I used a lot of high technology, tie wraps, electrical tape. This is leading edge stuff. And then it's running on this one AA alkaline batteries. People didn't have alkaline batteries 100 years ago. And there's 2 here only because the battery holder I had was a 2 battery holder. Because keep in mind, I bought nothing to do this. This is all stuff laying around the house. So the cigar box, I have all red plastic terminals, as you saw, because I don't happen to have any black ones. And okay, let's move on with that. So here's the hookup that you're going to see right over my shoulder when we go over to it. And so I'm using some computer powered speakers just to make it work. The battery pack, you got to have a headphone. The inductance of the headphone is part of the circuit. So if you, and just for grins, I put a 2000 ohm resistor across there and it barely worked. Then I'm grounding through the AC line. So you see the green wire running through here. It goes to the round terminal on the AC line. And then to hook up the speaker, here's the headphone connection. Here's a capacitor because we got B+ voltage sitting over here. And we don't want that going into the amplifier of the speaker. So I've got a coupling capacitor and then the speaker's plugged in over here. So let's do a demo. I'm going to unshare here if I can figure out how.
Okay.
So here's the radio. Give me a second to hook up the A battery.
Reserved for that phone originator. We're talking at the beginning of the show.
Here's the Holly. So WGN in Chicago, for those of you who don't live here or don't DX, know that WGN is 50,000 watts and it's a clear channel station. Some 2 things that didn't exist, as I mentioned. So we can pick up WGN across half the band. And I can actually get 4 stations. So when you get a quieter station, everything interacts, of course. You have the coupling here, the filament voltage, and the main tuning. Of course, the filament voltage is going to cause more gain in the tube. And the coupling, of course, is going to give you more gain in the RF. And so it's a matter of doing all this stuff. Now, keep in mind, through the magic of technology, the way this camera works, this thing's mirror imaged on your screen. And, you know, doesn't mean that. And then the good news side, Matt, there's no music on AM radio in Chicago, so it's all talk, so we don't have to worry about that. So that's my demo. I'm pretty well done. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Tom. That's a great presentation. And I forgot to introduce Tom as the president of ARCI in my introduction, so I apologize for that. And in addition to being the president with all his presidential duties, he has time to do this kind of stuff and do presentations. So thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
A question.
Yeah.
Is it easy right now where you're at to open up the radio so we can see inside? I'm curious just to see when you dial that, what's it called? The spider web.
Yeah.
I just want to see that move. That looks really cool.
All right. Let me see if I can screen share again. Well, actually, if I can just put, there we go.
Yeah, perfect.
I don't know if you guys can see or not, but.
Yep.
Wrong now.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Let me get you, there we go.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions for Tom?
Yeah, I got a quick one. In old sets like that, like you got a 1-2 set, how long would a tube last in a set like that usually? I mean, it's probably sure it's dependent on the filament voltage, and if you have that cranked up, like did they have a really short life, or does anybody know?
I would offer, in my opinion, that they're going to have a very long life. First off, tubes were horribly expensive back then. If you were going through tubes, it probably became unpractical. The other thing is you don't tend to run them at full filament voltage, which also helps keep the filament from burning out. So unless, you know, somebody like Robert may have a better input than me, but that's my opinion, is that, you know, this WD-11 is, you know, probably 80 years old or so, and it's still cranking along. Now, that hasn't been used every day since 80 years ago, but
Thanks.
when I get used of these tubes, a lot of them are still testing good, whether they're WD-11s and 12s or 201s or whatever. I mean, you do get duds and so on, but yeah, I don't think you had a reliability problem back then, because they're pretty simple. I mean, there's only 3 elements in the tube. There's a filament, a grid, and a plate. There's no cathode. There's as long as you didn't shock them or break the glass, I think you're okay.
A decent company would crank out tubes in 1925 that would be good and serviceable for 400 to 600 hours, and unless you were Magnavox in their last tubes, they put several hundred of them through a life test, and none of them lasted more than 6 hours. So, and they shut down their manufacturing, but 400 to 600 hours was good. And you have to remember, people didn't listen to radios all day long. They just listened for a few hours in the evening, maybe. And so that stretches out to, you know, a couple, 3 years worth of good use.
All right. Any other comments for Tom? Okay, well, again, thank you very much, Tom, for the excellent presentation. And next, I will introduce Matt Scott, who will talk about the evaluation he did on the Hurricane AM modulator that he bought. This is a topic that I've seen a lot of activity on, going back and forth on the Google groups. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Matt.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right, so I have, in the last few years, gotten into AM antique radio restoration. And so the first radio that I restored was a RCA All-American 5, and it had a phono jack input. So I just used a Bluetooth receiver so I could stream music to it. However, as I have worked on more radios, I just wanted the easy way to broadcast music to those radios so I could listen to the music on more than one radio at once. And so I started a hunt for AM modulators, and in that hunt and on our Google Groups forum, there have been a lot of suggestions. I guess at one point there was a company making a model called the SS Trans, and I think when I first saw that, it was like a year beyond when they stopped manufacturing that, but everyone raved about that particular modulator. So I wanted to try to find something as good as whatever that was, although I've never used one or heard one of those. So the options that I was seeing were on that Google Groups forum that we have. There was a number of posts about modulators coming from some manufacturer in China. And then there was another one coming from whatever that national radio organization is. They sell bare PCBs that you can populate yourself, and they have a couple that you can buy. And then I came across this one, the Hurricane AM modulator, and it is by far the most expensive option. And so I thought, oh, you know what, go big or go home. I'll try it out and see what happens. So this is a report on its performance. Although I have not used any other modulator, so just fair warning, I got nothing really to compare it to, except for, you know, listening to the radio through the direct phono jack input or a radio station. So maybe at some point we can all bring different modulators to a swap meet and just compare and contrast. But this is my report on the modulator. So I'm just going to talk about the product details and the product performance today. And product details, website and cost. This is a company called 6v6 Electronics. It's based in the UK. I've got the product link there in its entirety, so anyone who's watching this can just type it in. It is not cheap. So first of all, shipping to the US, I paid about $24 for that, which I guess isn't bad considering it's going across the ocean. The modulator itself comes in a few different varieties. The base model is $150. That's including the VAT tax coming from Europe. You can purchase, and for additional $13, an option to stream your music to the modulator via Bluetooth. And then if you pay another $13, you have the ability to download an app that you can use to control the box and in lieu of the 3 buttons on the front there that you see. So I thought, well, I'm dropping this money, I might as well just buy the biggest and best thing. Although I found out later that the app itself is only available on Android operating systems. But again, all it does is replace the front panel. So in terms of controlling the unit, which, you know, isn't really that big of a deal. But for me, the Bluetooth streaming was definitely essential because I wanted to be able to be portable with what I was sending out into the airwaves. So that's the company and the cost. Here's a description from the website. I'll just read through it. The Hurricane Intelligent AM transmitter USA version with 10 kilohertz channels and US power lead. They have several different models on their site. This was the newest one, so this is the one I purchased. It says it's an intelligent AM modulator. It has a digital frequency synthesizer controlled with a RISC-based microcontroller. And as I said, it has optional Bluetooth and audio and Bluetooth remote control. They say it's easy to transmit high quality audio to any AM broadcast band receiver or radio receiver. The transmitter is ready built and ready to run at an affordable price with performance and features costing many times the price. All right, here's a list of features on their website, just a few I want to call out in this presentation. It does the full AM spectrum of frequencies, which is nice. It has built-in audio VU meter, modulation monitor, antenna voltage meter, and all these meters typically have a little bar graph and then a number readout on the unit itself that you can look at. It has a 3.5 millimeter jack socket, so you can input audio via that method if you would like, if you don't want to use Bluetooth. It claims it's compliant with FCC Part 15. And then let's see here. It has an antenna connector on the back, and it comes with an antenna, a 3-meter antenna ready to go. And then I guess they just listed that twice. Once again, it has the 3.5 millimeter audio input. So packaging, so just going through my impressions of this thing, I purchased it. It came very well packaged. It comes with, it's made in the UK, but for the power adapter, it has a power plug that is adaptable to different power plugs because, you know, they're selling it in Europe. They want it to be adaptable. It comes with the 3.5 millimeter audio jack. And then on the right side there is the antenna. It didn't come all bundled up like that. It came like nicely wrapped up, not in a rat's nest like is shown in that picture. That's after I had it out for a few days, so that's it sitting on my desk. On the right, that's the antenna. And then the enclosure, it looks as such. It's I didn't take measurements, but there's a dirty coffee cup for you to compare it to. The front of it has 3 buttons, the menu, decrease and increase buttons, and a little readout on the right-hand side there. And on the back, there's the antenna plug and then a hole for the ground. So it needs to be grounded in some capacity. So they have a little screw that opens up on the inside. And I just took a piece of wire, screwed down the wire there, and then screwed the other piece of the wire to screw on an outlet that it is plugged into. And then you see the power jack and the audio input jack if you choose to use that. Okay, so I opened the thing up to inspect it, looked inside, and the PCB looks fantastic. I mean, it's like very well designed. They got plenty of room, right? So it's like nicely lined up, just like visually appealing. And then the solder joints, I inspected them, and they are very well manufactured as well. The thing just like looks like it is well done, like they took pride in what they were building here. So I was very pleased to see that. In the upper right hand corner, you can see the screw where you need to connect the ground connection. So you just undo the screw and screw in whatever wire you're using to connect it to ground. Moving on, I just wanted to show some pictures of the documentation. The documentation it came with is also excellent, very clear, very well laid out, very detailed. So I just wanted to show some pictures of what that looked like. This isn't available on their website, so if anyone's interested in seeing the actual documentation later, we can talk about that offline and I can show you that documentation. But I was also very pleased with what that looked like. So that, again, based on the PCB and the documentation, I was like, okay, this thing, someone put time and effort into building this and creating this product is the impression that I got. So moving on to product performance. Our test setup is my very first radio that I had restored, an RCA Victor with the official certification of the Golden Throat. So you know it's good quality. I used the Bluetooth method of connecting to the modulator because that's how I will mainly be using the modulator. I also tested it using the 3.5 millimeter jack input, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So I had this radio that I was receiving the music on. I plugged in the unit into the wall, and you can see where I have my ground wire connected to. I live in a pretty standard Chicago style multi-unit apartment. I'm on the top floor. It is a long and narrow unit. So on the one end of the unit, you can see I plugged in the modulator, and that's where I had it. Oh, and it's kind of hard to see, but I have the antenna just kind of draped up over. I tried to extend that thing as much as possible. This just run over the blinds there so I could have it extended. And here's what I did. So I just tested it out at different intervals of distances. And so the first test on the far left was the radio was like right next to the transmitter, closer than 1 foot, but I just labeled it 1 foot. And then I moved the radio up into the kitchen, which was about 17 feet away. And then the third from the left, I took the radio and I moved it all the way down the apartment unit into the room I'm in now. So it's a ways down and then through a door to the right, and that was 39 feet away. And then I took the thing outside on our back deck and shut the door and pulled the radio as far away as I could, and that's 45 feet away. So those are the distances at which I tested this. Just a few notes before I tell you how it worked. The sound quality of the music. So obviously the local radio stations sound best through my radio, but the quality coming from the AM transmitter still sounded comparable, I suppose. The Bluetooth connectivity did sound the best compared to the 3.5 millimeter audio jack. I'll talk a little bit about that again later if we got time. But the Bluetooth connectivity did sound quite well compared to the local radio stations, just lower in volume, I suppose. Limitations on this test setup. So the actual limitations are the Bluetooth connectivity, which is about 40 feet away from the modulator. Once I went beyond that, the Bluetooth connectivity went out. As I tune into the radio station that I'm broadcasting on, you do need to kind of zero in on that. And then if with minor variations of the tuning, you can hear either a little bit of interference or the tone of the station of the audio change from heavier bass to heavier treble. And let's see here. And then you definitely need to ground this thing, otherwise you hear some hum and interference coming through the broadcast. All right, so I'm gonna describe each of the distances, and then I got a video that kind of shows or lets you listen to the audio quality of this thing. So the first distance, 1 foot, right next to the broadcaster. There's clear connectivity. It sounded great. Again, not maybe as good as the AM broadcast stations, but quite close. The biggest difference was just the volume at which I had to set the radio to hear the music. And then 17 feet away on my counter, the difference between 1 foot and 17 feet really was only that the volume lowered a little bit, but I had plenty of room to go in the volume adjustment. So I just turned it up and it was just fine. Clear connectivity. The music sounded the same. So no degradation of quality really from 1 foot to 17 feet. And then moving on to 39 feet away down the apartment hallway to the right in my room. Again, the quality didn't degrade. The volume was similar to the 17 feet distance. So I didn't really notice any difference between the 17 feet and the 39 feet distances. And then finally outside, I closed the door for good measure. At this point, really the only issue was that Bluetooth cut out. So my workaround for that was to connect my computer to the AM modulator and stream from Spotify. And then I would just use my phone as a remote control for Spotify. But having a radio outside, door closed, again, no degradation of quality. It sounds similar to the 17-foot and 39-foot tests. And no degradation of volume either. The only difference in volume was between the 1 foot and 17 feet. Okay, so with that said, I hope the audio plays through this. I'm going to play this and I might narrate a little bit as I go through. The music playing is from YouTube's digital rights free catalog that you can use when creating YouTube videos. So there's no rights issues here with the music. All right, so this is just the music playing from my computer speaker. All right, here we are through the AM transmitter, 1 foot away. "17 feet away. I tried to hold the phone about the same distance. And this is outside. Still a strong signal. I turned it up so the neighbors could hear. And that's with the door closed. All right, so conclusion, the audio quality and range, it's through Bluetooth, the quality is just like maybe a little bit slightly worse than broadcast quality in terms of it's mainly the volume and the clarity, but through Bluetooth, it still sounds quite good. When I played audio into the modulator with the 3.5 millimeter jack, it sounded awful at first. There's a lot of interference. I expected it to sound better through the jack. And after talking with Matt about this, I messed with a few settings. It turned out I just needed to turn down the volume of my MP3 player that was playing into the modulator. But even with tweaking that setting, it still did not sound as good as using Bluetooth, which I found surprising. But I'm using Bluetooth for it anyhow. That's my main use case, so it doesn't really bother me. The range seems awesome, just in the distances that I tested it at. The only degradation was through volume, and then I had plenty of volume control to go on my radio, so I just turned up the volume on the radio, and that was fine. I love the digital display on the front. It's easy to change stations. You have the full AM band you can broadcast on. It's nicely fabricated and packaged, and overall, I'm very happy with the purchase. So that concludes the presentation, and if anyone has any questions, I'd love to answer them at this time.
This is great stuff. I know there was so much going back and forth on our email about everybody's opinions on AM transmitters. I think we've all dealt with it. I've built a couple of them. I got that one that's with the whole house AM transmitter.
Mm-hmm.
To me, they were all pretty terrible, universally terrible.
Okay.
And I still, there's one I built, there was a 1 tube transmitter. It's okay, but there's no way I'm going to get 40 feet out of it. Like, the lucky if I'm 2 feet away and it still works.
Oh, really?
So, thank you. Great presentation, by the way. Great how you did that. I have a question about the antenna on the unit. So
Sure.
you had like draped over your, your over up on your window or whatever. Did you have to mess with that, the way you set up that antenna to get it to work the right way? And how long was the antenna as they gave it to you, the wire?
The wire length of the one they gave to me was 3 meters, and I believe 3 meters is FCC compliant, isn't it? Or is it 3 feet or 3 meters that the FCC requires? Does anyone know?
FCC says 10 feet, so you're under that.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, so it's 3 meters, which is under 10 feet. That's what they supply. For my test in my apartment, there wasn't much I had to do with the antenna. Now, I am in an apartment building, so it's not like I went, between floors. I would love to test it in a house where I'm going like from downstairs to upstairs or something. Where I work on stuff, my dad has a workshop in his basement, and so I was using this in his basement. I didn't test it in his house, but when I was using it down there, he has they're not neon or not fluorescent lighting, but it's like that same shape, but they're LED lights, which is the newer version, and so like when at first I had just thrown the wire over that light, and that caused some interference. So I just took it off of the light and then moved it around a little, and then that interference went away. In his basement, I did have to like adjust it a little bit, but in this test in my apartment, I did it like this, and then I just kind of like threw it out to the left over whatever furniture was in the room, and it still was working just fine. But I have in use noticed if I move the antenna, it changes the reception. And then there was at one point I was just playing around with it, and I just grabbed the antenna in a wad and stuck it right next to the radio antenna. And the main thing there was volume. I mean, the signal was much stronger, so it just like the music blasted out of it. But having it draped up like this, it was just my quick way of trying to get it to extend. And I haven't had to mess with it too much in order to have success in this test, at least.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That
And
was
at
an
some
awesome presentation.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions for Matt?
I've got something for Matt.
Yeah.
Matt, are you a new member of the club?
Yeah, so I joined, I think I came out to the February swap meet as part of the first one. I was living out in California in 2018 to 2020, and I was part of their CHRS, I think is their acronym. So I started working on radios out there, and then I moved back here during the pandemic, and had been looking for another club to join. So I came out to your guys' swap meet, and yeah, it's been great so far. You've all been wonderful to work with.
Well, welcome to Chicago and welcome to the club. Very good. It's nice to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Nice to be here.
What's the range of that modulator?
In terms of like the maximum distance it can transmit.
That would be 41 feet, at least.
Yeah, so according to my test, at least 41 feet. Now, again, the impression I get from this unit and from the company is, it seems high quality, and they claim it's compliant with FCC rules. So I don't have a portable unit. I have a portable unit. I just haven't restored it yet. But I haven't had a chance to like actually test the maximum distance to see if it kind of breaks those FCC rules in terms of whatever that distance is. But yeah, so I don't know what the maximum range is as far as like testing, and I don't think they specify it in their product details. They just say it's compliant with the rules, and
So
they have.
It'd probably be in the range of the house anyway.
Yeah, the range of the house on the same floor. And they sell several models for the European market as well. And I'm pretty sure the European market has some stringent requirements as well in terms of what you're allowed to broadcast. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I I don't know if it actually complies with the FCC rules, but I trust their product more than some of the other products I've seen online. So I guess I'll let you guys know next virtual meeting if I'm logging in from jail or something. Then you'll know if I broke the rules.
I want to also welcome you to the club.
Thank you. Thank you.
I saw commentary somewhere else that said that yes, the basic design is capable of actually considerably more power, but they're playing by the rules of the game here in the U.S. and so they're not going to comment on how to modify it for non-compliance.
Yeah, and again, here's their website, so you can check out all indications of quality show, good designed website, good designed product, nice documentation. So everything seems nice if that is an indication of quality, as much as it can be.
Matt Scott, would you put the link in the chat, and that way I can broadcast it out.
Sure, I'll send the main page, and I'll send the product page as well. Yep.
Hey, Matt, your apartment doesn't have a roof deck, does it?
On a roof deck? No, it doesn't. It just has a back porch. So, again, at the next swap meet I go to, I'll bring the unit and we can just play around with it if we want. It'd be nice. I would be really interested in hearing the difference between this and the SS Trans unit that everyone seems to rave about. I've not used any other AM modulator before, so if other people have some, it would be fun to then just hear the differences in person.
Okay, well, Matt, I'm going to say thanks very much again for that excellent presentation, and also welcome to the club and welcome to being a presenter at the virtual forum.
Yeah, thank you.
I must commend you for joining a club real quick and being a presenter right away. So that's a great thing. And at this point, I'd like to put up a poll to see if anybody else out there would like to be a presenter. Presenters are what make this virtual forum a reality. And I can't thank you guys enough for participating and being presenters. So here's an opportunity for you to sign up and be a presenter. So please look at the poll closely and see if you're interested in doing so. And at this point, after we finish the presentations, we move to the show and tells. And today, I believe we have 5 show and tells, which is kind of a recent historical record for the number of show and tells. So I want to keep it moving. And I think I'd like to keep these between 3 or 4 minutes, although Robert Lozier has got a little bit longer one, so I'll ask him to go first and take the proper time. Robert?
My failing memory says it's 5 minutes and 45 seconds. So let me run this little slideshow here. A persistent friend of mine asked for a miniature piano hinge for a wireless specialty apparatus company radio cabinet of 1922. I've never made one like this in my shop. I cannot punch precision squares in metal. I wondered if water jet cutting could do this at an affordable cost. Sure enough, my friend found a Charlotte shop that would cut 10 strips of thin brass for $100. What the heck, he's paying for it. I folded and formed the hinge eyes with no proper tools. But after 6 or 8 hours of pondering and cursing, I had 2 lengths looking pretty good. And then my friend had the nerve to tell me that he needed for me to nickel plate them. All my previous home nickel plating has been done in a 1/2 liter glass beaker. I went to Walmart and found a 2.4 liter plastic food storage container about 9 inches high. Years ago, I had bought a zinc plating kit from Caswell Electroplating, but never used it. It came with 2 quartz rods, submersible heating elements, and a thermostat controller. One rod brought the temperature in this container up to the required nominal 113 degrees Fahrenheit just fine, but the temperature was highly stratified in this tall tank. I found on eBay a cheap magnetic stirrer as used in chemistry. It just happened to fit perfectly under the tank. My brass hinge parts just barely fit into this tank, but they plated nearly perfectly. Hard to photograph here because of the mirror-like surfaces, but I can say that this plating setup works great for me. And there is more. Here I have a rare artifact with an interesting history, but it has many conservation and restoration challenges to ensure suitability for exhibition. Note the heavily corroded nickel plate over brass hardware, such as wiper arms, switch contacts, knob pointers, phone jacks, etc. My old way to plate such parts after cleaning is to string them on wires or screw them into stainless steel tapped straps and suspend in the tank. But keeping the current density uniform on small irregular parts while plating is frequently less than satisfactory. Sharp edges accumulate plate faster than the rest of the part. For such small parts, commercial platers pour loose parts into porous, non-conductive barrels that rotate in the bath. The random mixing of the parts in the rotating barrel averages the current passing through the parts. I find a few really small plating barrels used commercially, but they range from $800 to $1,200 plus. Certainly a deal killer for my hobby work. And not even amateurs seem to have made their own small format plating barrels. So time for me to design my own. My idea is to use plastic canvas, commonly available at any craft store, to make the barrel. It is laced with woven fish line to 2 plastic discs. A length of plastic pipe is glued in the center of each disc to form a flange with an ID of about 3/4 of an inch. Parts are simply poured through that opening. A 3 RPM motor salvaged from a junk microwave oven found on the side of the road easily provides more than enough torque to rotate the drum. Cheap plastic gears about 2 inches in diameter transfer the torque down to the barrel, about $1 each from vendors on Amazon. A slug of brass called a dangler with rounded ends is soldered to a length of high flexibility silicone jacket wire. One is laid in each end of the barrel and connected to a negative bus bar. Plating voltage is only about 1.75 to 2 volts. Plating time is about a half an hour at a nominal 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The barrel frame simply rests along the top edge of the 2-liter plating tank. The barrel is big enough to handle all the small hardware of your typical 1920s vintage set in a single batch. These screws and clips are small, 440 and 632. I judge the results to be excellent. What do you think? And there you go.
That's awesome.
And
Did you have to prepare the clips first, the hardware, or do you like strip them with acid?
oh, yeah, they were terribly corroded. So there was plenty of time spent on the buffing wheel and the wire brushes and all that to clean them up, because electroplating is in micro inches, and so that your part is only going to be as shiny as the part was to begin with. You don't create shininess as you go along. So yeah, you have to use the classic material preparation of electroplating. And the drum just happens to be great at averaging out the current density on irregular parts. So
let me ask this question. What do you charge for making one of those for me?
It's free if you can figure out how to give me the time to do it.
Just messing with you.
Well, that's great, Robert. That's you certainly are resourceful and creative and getting stuff done like that. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I have another talk, but I didn't time it, but I think it runs 9 minutes. So considering other people on the line here, maybe I'll save that for some other time.
Okay, and save that for September, and we also look forward to a presentation from you in September. So thank you very much for your show and tell today, and I'll open it up to the next show and tell guy, whoever that wants to be.
Tom, it's Marty Linke. I'll be happy to jump in.
Okay, Marty.
Well, hello, everybody. Good morning. Nice to see everybody in the virtual forum today. Last time we talked, I told you guys I was spending some time in the transistor world, and I have been doing that, and picked up just a couple of items. I've got a little transistor radio here that I picked up at an antique mall this week for $11. So some glue, 2 capacitors, and a new battery, and it's working again. It now becomes part of my collection. It's an awful radio. It just does not work well, but it's got a nice color, and I've got 5 or 6 of them now, all in different colors. So I'll share that maybe the next time around. I picked up at a estate sale a really nice Motorola transistor radio, 10 transistor radio. I had this one out in the Forest Reserve this week, and this radio is one of the best performing AM transistor radios I've ever had. It is just very, very sensitive, very selective, and it's just an absolute winner and a great addition to the collection here in Bridgeview. At another estate sale, I picked up a mobile FM converter. You guys talked about these a little bit earlier today. And what I did was I went to Batteries Plus. I got a rechargeable battery that I glued onto the bottom of the converter. And for the antenna, I cut off the connector and I soldered onto the connector of the antenna lead a little ferrite antenna. And this setup now gives me FM radio on all of my restored radios. I get about 2 or 3 feet of coverage, but that's enough. You just put it on top of the radio, turn it on, and now you have full FM on all of the retrofitted radios. Now, I haven't forgotten about my world of the A5s. So I did one since our last visit together. This is a Brand and Millen model DR102U. It's a Canadian firm and totally restored, repainted, and another nice addition to the collection here in the shack. So very good. So I haven't forgotten my tube roots. I'm back to them, but I do like spending time on transistors once in a while. All right, that's it from Bridgeview.
Well, thank you, Marty. You always manage to show what you've found through your expeditions out into the antique malls and estate sales. So thanks for that.
I would like to ask you one question. Does anybody have an idea where I'm going to put room to put all this stuff? It's getting to be a problem.
I think we all have that problem. Well, except maybe for the new guy. Okay, who's next on the show and tell? Thank you, Marty. Dale, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how many people have seen the box. It's Brightson True Blue. It's got a bad label on the bottom, but when you open the box, there's a Brightson True Blue tube in there. It's an 01A. And this one has a certificate, and the serial number on the certificate matches the serial number on the tube. And I looked for those for a long time. George Brightson made these tubes in 1925. The first advertisements were 1925, and the last advertisements were 1925. It's blue glass, sort of a mahogany brown base. The name is stamped into the bottom. And these came in sets. The tube is, this one is a T11. It's 1 3/8 inch diameter. So that's 11/8, which makes it a T11. Here's another one. Got a much better label on the bottom. Hasn't been eaten off. This is not tipped, and it's pretty much translucent. You can see the construction inside the tube. Most of them are a real gassy tube inside, which prevents you from seeing the construction. So here's another one that's got a different label, a much larger label. It's got water stains on it, but the printing is considerably different. So they made them in the one tube. 1, 2. Here is a 3-tube set, which is difficult to find, and took me many years to find that. The box is in pretty good shape. It's got a logo embossed into the top. Different boxes have different logos on the top. This one's got a label on the back as well. There was a clasp on the front. Part of that is missing. That says on most of them. That one's got a good paper label on it. And then back in 2010, my wife and I made a trip down to Carolina to visit relatives. And Robert will probably remember this one. This I bought at the auction, the Ernie Height auction. It's got a nice label on the bottom. The clasp is missing. It's a 5-tube set. Now, when they came out originally, the 5-tube sets, all the tubes were sequentially numbered with the labels on and guaranteed. And so they made these also in sets of 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I understand from one of the past presidents of AWA that there's a guy that's got all the multiple sets. I can tell you that from the tubes that I have, the lowest number is a 4000 series serial number. The highest number is a 98,000. So George Brightson and his company was pretty busy. They also made it in a 99, a UV 99. I don't have an example of those, but I've seen the picture of one in the book Radio Tubes and Boxes. George Fathauer has a couple of pages in there that's really good information. And Millard's book, Collector's Vacuum Tube Handbook, has a 5-tube set on the cover. You can hunt around a lot of websites looking for the information. And I saw that Howard Stone tuned in here, and if you go to Stone Vintage Radio Museum, you'll see his 5-tube set and a 6-tube set and a 5-tube, the blue deluxe radio tubes, which I've never seen those in person. But that's an introduction to the Brightson blue tubes. So
Well, thank you, Dale.
yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah,
That's great.
I find it fascinating, and I missed the Tube Collector Association, which disbanded, but met a lot of interesting people through that.
Okay, we've got a few more show and tells queued up here, and to keep this moving, I'll just open it up to whoever's prepared to go next.
I got a impromptu one. Okay, so I had bought a number of just general books on radios from the era of vacuum tubes to try to like bolster my literature and learn more about the theory behind things and the structure of things. And generally the format those books take is they, maybe they'll show like a AA5 radio and then kind of talk about each section, the theory, and then explain what certain things do, and then have like troubleshooting tips and whatnot. But then this other one that I purchased, which you guys may be familiar with, is probably the most excellent book I've read so far, and it's just called Elements of Radio. I guess it's mirrored in the video there. By Marcus and Marcus. This is just from a list of like some books I found. Someone made a list of books online and said, okay, these are the best ones. And the format that this one takes is that it goes through the history of radios in the first half of the book, from the basics of what you need to actually receive a radio station throughout the first half of the 19th century. And then it talks about how radios developed, how those technologies developed, and describes variations on each significant technological improvement of AM tube radios up through the AA5 and then beyond, getting into FM receiver technology. And reading through it in that format has been very educational, just in terms of understanding how the radios work, but then understanding what variations in architecture I might see when restoring radios from different eras. Because in these other books, it just says, oh, here's a typical AA5. Well, that doesn't help me if there's like 1,000,000,001 different variations of it, right? But this one presents a lot of those variations. And so I would highly recommend this book just as a guide or as reference. And I just found it to be a very interesting read.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Could you put that reference in the chat window, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Have you checked to see if World Radio History has that in a PDF format? They have,
I have not.
textbooks.
That's a good idea. I have not checked that.
Yeah, thanks for that information, Matt. Okay, I know that Matt the Elder has show and tell, so I will open it up to Matt.
Matt the Elder. My kids are going to love this one. Okay, I'm actually going to share my screen. And this is our YouTube site. What I wanted to show you is the index a little more slower. So when you go to the main site, you normally arrive here. This is the video screen is the one that everybody clicks on. But if you go all the way to the end, down here to About, and scroll down, you'll get this full index of presentations link. This is the only place on the YouTube site where it allows links to external sites. So I had to put them here. You click on that, that jumps to this Google Sheet. And that's a spreadsheet that we can scroll for looking at any particular content that we're looking for. So it lists, the person's name, the title, the date, and on the far right is the link button. So as an example, I know that Bill Cohn did a presentation a while ago about safety caps. And let me find it here. I might have to sort. Let's see, All American 5 safety caps right here. And I was talking about that. I think with Matt Scott. And so all you need to do, it's hard to do on the screen. Let me scroll this way, hit that link. And I probably didn't share the audio, but that runs right into his presentation on safety caps. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. You can also do things where we sort on the content like you can on any Google Sheet. So if you wanted to get fancy here, and you can go up to data, sort sheet, sort the sheet, and sort by individual columns, for example, sorting by name or topic. But that's something that I think makes all of our content a lot more accessible. And over the last 3 years, we have some amazing presentations. So we'll keep updating this as the presentations come up.
Thanks, Matt. Just out of curiosity, how many presentations are there? How many lines in that spreadsheet?
Let's see. 128.
That's great.
So, well, -3, so 125.
Okay, well, that's awesome. I think that could be the end of the show and tell then, Matt. I appreciate you doing that review of the index. And by the way, you can download that index as an Excel file, right? You can export it.
I think so. This is locked so that it's view only. You can't change it. You can't mess it up for anybody else, but I think you can copy it.
Yeah, you can download it. So. Okay, any other show and tells today? Since Jeff had an interesting topic on how to.
I just got a quick one.
Oh, okay.
When we're back to the car radio thing, I had forgotten the antenna connector that goes into your car radio is commonly referred to as a Motorola connector. Today's trivia.
I think that will actually conclude the show and tell, but I'd like to get Jeff's topic back in the forefront here. Jeff, you were trying to figure out a way to tell if the LO is working.
Because the radio, like I said, all the voltages and all the tubes, the B+ voltages, everything is right on. There's fortunately the manual for building this AA5 had a comprehensive list of voltages for everything and resistance values, and I went through everything, and the only thing that's really off is that pin 1 on 12B6, which I understand is an indicator should go negative, like -7 volts or something when the 455 when the local oscillator is working. But it's not. It's only like -0.5 volts or something. And I was asking about simple ways to tell if your local oscillator is working or not.
Anybody have a suggestion?
Well, one question, I think I saw this happen on one kit thing where the instructions had you wiring up one of the coils on the oscillator backwards. So we're just reversing the connections and see if it takes off singing.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment. And in fact, I tried reversing and changing the connections. There used to be 3 connections on this particular oscillator coil. It's not quite center tapped. It's off to one side. I measured the resistance on it. I switched connections around. I tried that. It didn't do anything. Yeah. The other thing, the interesting thing in the radio, it has on the IF cans, when you put them on, there's like a red dot. It's supposed to be aligned a certain way. I'm not sure why that matters. I believe I did follow the convention they wanted me to do. Other than, of course, the wiring's got to be right, for the cans. I don't see why they couldn't flip them the other way.
Jeff, do you have a transistor radio in the house?
Yeah, I met quite a few. Yeah.
All right, if you turn that transistor radio on, tune it above around 1100, hold it next to your AA5 and tune your AA5, the oscillator should be heard on the transistor radio. If it's not working.
Yeah,
It's a real quick test to see if your AA5 oscillator is working.
I have heard that. Thank you. And I tried that test and I'm not hearing anything. So I don't know. I don't know what else to do unless somehow the way the schematic or the wiring in the radio was incorrectly done in the first place. Okay.
Do you know if you have continuity in the coil from lead to lead? You do have continuity.
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a tough one, Jeff.
Yeah, I know. It's driving me nuts. Because you can hear static. You can hear it like this. And when I throw it, I put the signal injector on it at 455. It's loud as can be coming through. So it's all tuned up properly. It just, I don't think the local oscillator's working. And I also check the tuning, the capacitor itself, to make sure it's not shorted, stuff like that, right?
Right.
So I don't know. Thanks for the suggestions, guys.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jeff. And to keep things moving towards a conclusion here, I'll basically thank everybody for being here today, and to the presenters as well for the great effort that you guys put forward. And with that being said, I'll wrap up our meeting, and we'll see you next time.